Humanity sets the agenda.
The time is just gone 4 minutes past 9 a.m. as we stay in the company of our Salam Media listeners and viewers this morning. Also welcoming One Nation 88.9 FM to the show this morning. News and views. It is with myself, Inayat Wadi, on this Thursday morning, the 24th of March 2022. The Ukraine war, 1 month, the anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And we see the entire world up in arms as far as Russia and Ukraine is concerned. We've heard the Ukrainian president this morning telling the world that they need to come out in their numbers in the streets to protest against what he calls Russian aggression. But there are so many other issues. There are so many other problem areas right across the entire world. And we know at this point in time, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has diverted international attention from conflict areas right across the world, whether we're talking about Yemen, we're talking about Mozambique, we're talking about the Sahel region. In Africa, we're talking about Palestine, Kashmir, the Xinjiang region out in China, the Rohingya. So, right across the entire world, not talking about the millions of Syrian refugees, but the focus right now is on Ukraine. And we joined on the line this morning by the Center for Africa China Studies at UJ. We're talking with Dr. Ekeminiabasi Eyita-Okon. We're talking about Ethiopia and the problems in Ethiopia at this point in time. Dr. Eyita-Okon, good morning to you and welcome to the show.
Good morning to you and to your listeners.
Yes, looking at the Russian invasion, obviously, and as I mentioned, the world's attention is focused on Russia and Ukraine at this point in time. But there are many, many problem areas right across the entire world. And we're talking about Ethiopia, 16 months already into a civil war. A lot is taking place at this point in time with Abiy Ahmed's forces and the Tigray People's Liberation Front. Now, all of this seems to have come off the radar and not even making any news, Dr. Aita Okon.
That's correct. I think the world seems to have turned its attention to Russia and Ukraine and following the crisis on a daily basis to see what the responses are, what impact, and who the key players are in as the war or crisis plays out. Yet, across the globe, there are crises that are still ongoing. Like you mentioned Syria, you mentioned Yemen, and of course, right here right in our continent, the Sahel in Ethiopia. And I think one of the reasons why we have seen a resurgence or a reemergence of Ethiopia back into mainstream news follows the recent immolation of a Tigrayan man being set on fire by what is deemed, or people who are deemed to be members of the Ethiopian and Eritrean joint forces. And that has sparked, or that video or that clip being posted on social media has indeed, sparked conversations and outrage as to why attention is only being placed on Russia-Ukraine when there is a 16-month still ongoing war taking place in Ethiopia.
Yes, and also when one looks at statistics, these numbers are horrific because we're talking about a calamity, we're talking about a horror situation that has evolved as a result of this conflict in Ethiopia. We're talking about mass starvation, we're talking about ethnocide, and we've even seen numbers being pushed out where we're talking of more than or close on to 500,000 people have died for various reasons, whether it's been from fighting, whether it's been from starvation, lack of medical attention. And yet, we see an entire world that is focused today. We've heard about 3 million refugees that have basically escaped, that are out of Ukraine, and we've heard of a few hundred people, civilians that have been killed. But to a large extent, these numbers, 500,000, these are numbers that we cannot ignore at all, Dr. Eita Okon.
Oh, that's very correct. I mean, the stat is quite worrying with arguments that 500,000 people have died so far in the 16-month conflict is indeed a staggering number. The fact that the stats show that between 50 to 100,000 of people have died just from fighting, while 150,000 to 200 have died from starvation, and another 100,000 dying from lack of medical attention is indeed worrying. And calls, it's something that should be a call for action, a call to action, not just by the international community in general, which technically doesn't have a face, but the African Union, considering that Ethiopia itself holds key organizations, key institutions of the African Union, needs to come into play here. Members of the now basin countries, also countries within COMESA, also have to come into play here. And I think what we've seen so far is shows, or it's evident that Abiy himself, is indeed continuing to engage in this war, because the struggle here is actually for legitimacy. With Tigray wanting some level of autonomy, with Abiy and his allies wanting some recognition of Tigray as part of Ethiopia, is indeed the bone of contention here. And I think it's 500,000 people is indeed more than enough to call this a genocide, or to call it an ethnocide, and requires an immediate action by, firstly, the African Union, and then with the support of the United Nations Security Council and other key players within the global peace and security architecture.
Yes, just in your mind, why do you think there is inaction on the part of the likes of the AU, and also when one looks at the United Nations in general? Because it certainly does reek of hypocrisy. We've heard about the racist nature of this conflict between Russia and the Ukraine. We've heard about people with blonde hair and blue eyes. It's like your neighbor next door. These are educated people. These are people just like your neighbor, but these are people that need help because they are running away from this conflict in the Ukraine. So there is this huge racist nature that this conflict has exposed. The Russian invasion of Ukraine versus what we have been seeing for years and years taking place in many other parts around the world, whether we're talking about the Middle East, North Africa, or also Ethiopia, Dr. Eyita-Okon.
Oh, I think I tend to agree with you. I think what the Russian-Ukraine conflict has showed us is that there is some underlying segregation or discrimination based on race, based on regions or geography, when it comes to how swift the international community is quick to, attend to or intervene where there is a crisis or where there is conflict. Secondly, I think we have seen the AU make attempts. However, we still have a problem of this of sovereignty. I think the idea and the underlying the idea, the meaning, and the what's the word I'm looking for, the recognition being given to sovereignty. I think there needs to be an understanding that in a case where there is an ongoing war where over 500,000 people have lost their life, I think sovereignty can indeed take the back seat, and more stricter action and more can be taken by regional bodies to intervene. I think the African Union has indeed made efforts sending a convoy, a mediation convoy to kind of bring the warring parties to the table to discuss, to negotiate. But both parties are unwilling to meet their respective terms. Abiy wants the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front to seize and disarm themselves, and also recognize that there is only one central government. But on the other hand, the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front do not want any of that. They want some level of autonomy. So that continuous set button between the two warring parties is what we're seeing. We're seeing this play out in the continued conflict that we're seeing. So I think that in response, perhaps the AU should consider a more stricter way, if not military intervention, if not diplomacy, perhaps an economic warfare. Unfortunately, this would have more impact. It may make matters worse, given that there's already starvation, the country is not producing, and of course the GDP also is being affected. But perhaps that would also create some sort of leverage, give the AU some leverage over Abiy, for instance, to bring him to the negotiation table and get this conflict under control, because there will be, and spillover effect into other regions, into forced migration, which kind of exacerbate the current issues that we're having across the continent, xenophobia, Afrophobia. So this is already at its height, and therefore the AU needs to step in yesterday as soon as possible.
Well, thank you very much for that, Dr. Ekeminiabasi Eyita-Okon. We thank you so much for taking time out this morning, talking to us, raising this particular issue and the plight of Ethiopia against the background of the conflict that is taking place. We wish you all the best. Please take care. And once again, we appreciate your time with us here on Salam Media this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that brings us on to 14 minutes past 9 a.m. That was Dr. Ekeminiabasi Eyita-Okon, the Center for Africa-China Studies. Ethiopia and not Ukraine is the scene of the world's worst war. And we're talking 500,000 people have died in the last 16 months for a variety of reasons. And this is obviously a genocide, an ethnocide, as Dr. Eyita-Okon called it. So with that, we're going to go for a break. The time is just gone 9:15. We come back. We're going to be playing out an interview that was conducted with the former Minister of Finance, Trevor Manuel, paying tribute to the late scholar from the MJC. We're talking about the anti-apartheid activists. We're talking of Sheikh Abdul Hamid Khabir, rahimahullah, who sadly passed away on Monday last night. We paid tribute with the people like Professor Farid Esak and also Imam Abdul Saban, who joined us out of Cape Town last night. So when we come back, we will be playing out this interview that we had conducted with the former Minister of Finance, paying tribute to Sheikh Abdul Hamid Khabir, rahimahullah.